If you're not familiar with his work, he puts out handbooks and tutorials on all sorts of topics. So this is just one of many different handbooks. Anyway, he is allowing me to use his handbook along with some of the materials I've created to create this mutant super course on YouTube. So we are going to cover 50, actually I think it's a little more than 50 commands that are useful, obviously to varying degrees. Some of them you'll use every single day as a developer, for example, and then some of them you may never use except in an emergency situation once a year. But I'm going to cover a bunch of them. They're not really in a particular order, especially towards the end of the course. But at the beginning, I ended up deciding that instead of just 50 random commands in any order, I wanted to make something for anybody. So if you're a beginner, you can start at the beginning and we'll go through the basics, navigation, working with the basic commands and options, and making folders and files and so on. But then after about this point, things really open up and you can jump around to whatever commands you'd like. And of course, if you're someone who already has some terminal experience, some of these commands are familiar to you, just hop around. Take a look at the description. There are timestamps, and just click on whatever command you're not really comfortable with or you've never heard of. There's probably something here for you. But if you're a beginner, I definitely would recommend starting at the beginning. So aside from these commands, which there's a lot here, and this is a pretty long video, I also cover some concepts that are pretty important. So the very basics, things like why even learn this stuff? If you're not a Linux user, you're on a Mac, you're on Windows, why do you need to know Linux commands? Do you need to know them? The answer is probably yes, if you're trying to break into web development, programming, coding, engineering, any sort of techie industry. Then we'll talk about things like Unix and GNU and Linux and Unix-like and true Unix. What is all that? What is a shell? What is bash, Z shell, kernel, terminology stuff? So that's all coming up. Of course, there's timestamps if you want to skip around, if you don't care about that stuff. And then installation. So if you're on a Mac, you don't really have to do anything. If you already have Linux installed, you don't really have to do anything either. And if you're on Windows, well, we have to jump through some hoops. The good news is fewer hoops than we had to jump through a couple months or years ago. So I'm going to show you how to install something called Windows Subsystem for Linux. Then we'll also talk about concepts like command structure and arguments and options, working with man pages, folder structure of Linux, redirecting standard output, appending standard output, tilde expansion, history expansion, path name expansion, curly brace expansion, and permissions. So we're going to end with permissions, a pretty big chunk, honestly, at the end of this course. It's devoted to just these two commands and understanding how to read and manipulate permissions on Linux. So there's a lot here. There's some introductory conceptual stuff and terminology, installation, and then we start from the basics so you can know nothing about the terminal, never have entered a command in your life, start at the beginning and don't skip around, or if you feel confident or you know some of this stuff, jump around, use the timestamps, they are there for you. Alright, so let's start with a quick discussion around why this matters. Why should you learn these commands? Yes, at times it might seem like you're, doing stuff straight out of a 1980s hacker movie, and we're far more advanced and things have improved so much. Why do we still have to use text commands? Well, there's a bunch of reasons, including the fact that you can just do a lot more from the terminal. Using these commands you're going to learn, you'll have more control, greater access. You can do things you just cannot do otherwise. There's just no way around that. If you want to start a server, manage different processes, interact with databases, all sorts of things, alter permissions, you need to know terminal commands to do that. Another reason, it's faster. At least once you get past the basic hurdles, you learn the commands, you get used to them, you can do things way faster. We can make 10,000 files in a single line. I can make 10,000 empty files, all with different names. Doing that graphically with my mouse or file, new, save, file, new, save, would take hours. Now that's just a sort of far-fetched example, but in general, we can do things much faster. The one problem is that when you're learning, it's going to be much slower. I kind of already hinted at this one, but we can actually automate things, we can speed up repetitive processes, we can save ourselves a lot of time. Another reason, it's available everywhere. So if you learn these commands, you'll be able to work on any Linux distribution. You'll be able to then switch over to a Mac if needed and use the commands on a Mac. Now on Windows, yes, it's a little bit different, so it's not technically available everywhere, but these commands we're going to learn are pretty standard across any sort of developer, software engineer career. Which leads me to the next point. It's essentially a requirement. If you want to be a web developer, data scientist, DevOps engineer, sysadmin, security admin, machine learning engineer, AI engineer, whatever, any type of coding related career, you are probably going to need to use the command line. You will have tools that only exist on the command line that you'll need to be able to use. So for a lot of people, that's the only reason that really matters. You just need it if you want to get a job. It's just part of the expected skill set. Also, a lot of cloud computing programs or services don't even have a graphical user interface. You just have to do things via a command line. And again, high-paying jobs, lots of careers, lots of roles that you'll need to at least know the basics of working with terminal commands. So the next topic I'd like to quickly discuss is a little bit of context around operating systems and why these commands will work on Linux and on Mac by default, but they're not going to work on a Windows machine, at least not out of the box. So there's quite a lot of complicated history and drama around different operating systems, things being open source versus closed source, and competition, and copying each other. It's quite dramatic, but the general gist that you need to understand is that over the years, since the very early days of computing, well, maybe not the super earliest days, but we're going back to the 70s here. This is a timeline that shows, a very detailed timeline that shows operating systems and how they're connected. Anyway, in the 1970s, there was something called Unix. You can see it here. And just take a look at all of these lines, this whole family of operating systems that it spawned. So there's lots and lots of them. Everything in red here is considered in some way related or indebted to Unix. So that includes things like Linux. So in this course, I'll be using Ubuntu, which you can see here. It is a distribution of Linux, but there's many, many others. Things like Android, Chrome OS, but also other more common Linux distributions like Fedora or Red Hat. Anyway, all this Linux stuff is descendant from Unix all the way back here in the 70s. Now we also will see, somewhere in here, all the different Mac operating systems. Here we are. So Mac OS X, we've got iOS, the Apple TV OS, Audio OS, Watch OS, all these different Apple products, all the Apple operating systems, also related to Unix. But then, our good friend Windows, somewhere down here, it's not even in the same red color, just to show how it is completely different. It is in green. This world of Windows, so Windows, Windows Vista, Windows XP, Windows Mobile, Windows Phone, Xbox OS, all that stuff is here. It's just kind of on its own. It is not related. It is not, a descendant of that original Unix operating system from way back in the 70s. Now, the reason this matters is that all of these guys in red up here, they tend to share the same commands. Unix was this operating system developed in the mid-60s at Bell Labs, really cool time, lots of innovation going on. But what matters to us today, 50 plus years later, is that lots of those innovations, lots of those new ideas and the specific commands, the actual interfaces, the way a file system was structured, all of that carries over today. Yes, it's changed, it's been expanded, but it is present in all of those red descendants of Unix. But unfortunately, for our Windows users, those commands don't exist natively on Windows. Windows has its own set of commands, its own default shell, its own way of doing things. So I'm going to talk about how we can get these Unix commands to work on Windows, but just so you understand why this is a problem in the first place, it just has to do with the history. There are so many of these OSs over the years inspired by and descended from the original Unix OS, including Linux and Mac OS, but not Windows. Only Windows over here. Alright, so now we have a basic understanding of the fact that of today's operating systems, there's really those two groups. Everything descended from Microsoft, and then kind of everything else that is in some form, some way related to Unix. Now that's a vast simplification, but again, we're just talking about popular operating systems, so, Linux, Chrome, Mac OS, all these things come from Unix. Now, let's talk about Linux and Unix and all that stuff in a little bit more detail, so that you understand what exactly Linux is, why it exists. So this is a diagram, it's from Wikipedia, that shows the history going back to 1969, early Unix versions, and how it spawned all the other operating systems that are connected to it. Now what you'll see is that there are three colors. Red is closed source, or pink, and that means the code is completely closed off. You can't edit it, you can't view it, you're not allowed to even try to tweak it. Then we have open source, which you may be familiar with that term. The code is openly viewable. You can change it, tweak it, make your own versions, try things out. And then there's, in yellow, this mixed/shared source type of operating systems. So what you'll see here is that early on, Unix and a lot of other operating systems in the early days were mixed or shared source. But then there was a plethora of closed source operating systems that were very walled off, and you were not allowed to do anything with that code. You were not allowed to view, edit, tweak, and so on. And that led to the rise of something called the free software movement. Free in this context does not mean no money, free beer. It instead means free in the context of freedom, free speech. So this software movement was all about the idea that you should be able to collaborate, you should be able to edit code, view source code, run, copy, distribute, study, change, and improve software. It should not be walled off. And the leader of this movement was this guy named Richard Stallman. So he began work on something that ended up being called GNU, G-N-U, that was his own free software alternative to Unix. So he wanted to make a full operating system that had everything that normally came with Unix, but it was going to be completely free. Again, free meaning you could tweak it and edit it, do whatever you want to it, and see the source code. Now that's a huge undertaking, creating an operating system. And at the same time, this other developer named Linus Torvalds, or Linus Torvalds, was working on something called a kernel. And we'll talk about what that is in a moment. But this kernel he was working on, he called it Linux, and a kernel is a very complicated and critical part of an operating system. It is the thing that basically sits between the hardware and the software, and it facilitates the interactions between different pieces of software and then the physical hardware of the computer. So what happened is that Richard Stallman was working on the GNU project, trying to build a full operating system. Well, he didn't have a kernel. But at the same time, Linus Torvalds was working on a kernel, and Torvalds ended up merging his kernel with the existing GNU components from Richard Stallman to create this whole
The booking app I used didn't have Agent Force, so an AI agent didn't know to move my reservations inside, or know what I like to eat. Which is not that. What's up, my brother? Oh, hey, man! We really needed this rain, right? Agent Force helps restaurants prevent dining disasters. Pat one over! It's what AI was meant to be. We got you, brother.
We don't play games out here.
Operating system. Just a quick note, so I don't get any negative comments here. There is a bit of controversy over the name of the resulting operating system. A lot of people, most people, have heard of Linux. Fewer people have heard of GNU. The term Linux, often people use it to refer to the entire resulting system, when in reality, the Linux kernel was just one piece that was added on to some existing components. But what matters for us here, if we go way back to this slide over here, is that what we see is a bunch of closed source, mixed source operating systems all over here, and then this thing called Linux pops up right there around 1991 in green. It's open source. Now there's not a direct line, as you can see, going back to any of these what are called true Unix operating systems. And the reason for that is yet another piece of history. There is a global consortium called the Open Group. They own the trademark for Unix. In order for you to call your operating system Unix, if you make an OS and you want it to be certified, you have to pay a lot of money, you have to go through a bunch of testing, you have to comply with a bunch of regulations and standards, and it's a complicated process, and there's money involved. It's not very free software. So, we have another term. There's true Unix. You've been certified as a true Unix operating system. And then we have Unix-like operating systems, which are compatible with the Unix standards. So they implement things correctly, but they haven't been certified as actually true Unix. And this is often because of financial considerations or ethical objections to the existence of the idea of true Unix. So what we see on this slide here is Linux enters the picture. It is not considered true Unix, but rather it's considered Unix-like. Remember that Linux itself is just a kernel, which is very, very important. It's, again, that piece of the operating system that connects the hardware to the software. So that's what Linux is really, it's the kernel. But when we talk about things like Ubuntu, what Ubuntu is a Linux distribution. It is one of many, many distributions out there. There's nearly 1,000 last time I checked. You may have heard of Fedora, Slackware, Ubuntu, that's what I'll be using. And what each distribution is, it's the Linux kernel. It's some GNU tools, documentation, a package manager, a desktop environment, a window management system, a whole bunch of other things combined together to form a full operating system. So to recap all of that, there are tons and tons of operating systems on this chart. You can see some are open source, some are closed source, some are mixed source. Some of them are considered true Unix. They've been certified by this foundation or this consortium to be true Unix. But then over here we have Linux. Linux is fully open source, and whether you call it Linux or Linux GNU or GNU Linux, it is a Unix-like operating system that conforms to all these standards that these operating systems do. We can use the same commands, things are structured the same way. There are subtle differences, but it doesn't really matter. Everything on this chart here, they're all part of this greater Unix family or Unix-inspired family. Now we have one last piece of terminology and history and all that stuff to get out of the way before we move on to actually running commands. We need to talk about the term shell. So you may have heard of this before. If you're on Windows, you may have heard of PowerShell, or you may have heard of Bash or Z Shell, or you maybe never have heard of them. But there's this concept of something called a shell. What the shell is a very, very important piece of software that is going to expose the operating system itself to human users or to other programs. So it is the thing that takes our commands and hands them over to the operating system to actually perform. And the term shell comes from the fact that it's the outer layer around the operating system, like the shell around an oyster. So there's this other term, terminal. Way back in the day, a terminal used to be an actual piece of hardware. It would have a screen, and it was a physical device with a keyboard. You'd go over and you'd enter your commands into the terminal. Today, terminal is just a piece of software. It's an application. There's many different terminal applications. It's the place we go to type our commands. When we hit enter, there's some shell that we are using in that terminal window. By default on Ubuntu and most Linux distributions, that shell is called Bash. On Macs these days, the shell is called Z Shell, ZSH. Another very popular shell is Fish. There are many other shells out there though. And again, their job is to take commands that we provide, or other applications, humans or applications provide, and then give them over to the operating system and make sense of it all. So again, I'll be using Bash. That's the default shell that comes with Ubuntu. But if you're on a Mac, I'll talk about installation, and you'll see that fortunately, Z Shell is very, very similar, and the commands are still going to work. So it's not a big deal at all, but it's good to know that there are different shells. And then the job of that shell is to take those commands and pass them over to the operating system. And as I mentioned, Bash is the most popular shell out there, especially on Linux-based systems. It is the most common default shell. And the name, if you're wondering, it comes from Born Again Shell. And it really doesn't matter, but it's this reference to this guy, Stephen Bourne, who created a different shell called SH, a direct ancestor of Bash. So there's SH and then Born Again SH. And again, Bash will run on pretty much every version of Unix or Unix-like systems. So it does run on Macs. It runs on, any Linux distribution, any of the Unix operating systems that you can see on that massive chart. Next up, let's talk about setup and installing things if needed so that you can run these commands. So right now we're looking at a Linux distribution. This is Ubuntu. This is the Linux distribution I'll be using throughout the course. If you already have Linux, if you have some version of it, some distribution, just use that. It's going to be very, very similar. All that you need to know is there's a built-in terminal application. I just search for terminal. I'm going to be running my commands in here, probably change the color, and this is where I'll type my commands. So if you are on a Mac, you do not need to go and install Ubuntu in a virtual machine. That's actually how I'm running this. I'm still on my Mac here, but I'm running it in a virtual machine. You can do that, but unless you have a really good reason to, I would just stick with what you know, because the commands that I'm going to show you will work on a Mac. Alright, so this is just for users who already have Ubuntu. Here's the terminal app, you just search for it and we'll run our commands there. Now, if you are a Mac user, Remember, it's part of this Unix family, Unix-like operating systems. All the commands I'm going to show you will work on the Mac. All you need to do is search for terminal, and it will probably look a bit different than this, but you will have a terminal where you can run the same commands I show you. So over here on Ubuntu, when I show the psaxww command, it works. You don't need to run this, by the way. But over here on my Mac, same thing, psaxww. It also works, and we'll actually learn what this is, but it gives me a bunch of stuff. Alright, Windows users, it's your turn. Let's talk about installation and the steps you need to go through in order to run Linux. So remember, the problem here is that on Windows, we just don't have access to the same commands. They're implemented differently. Windows is not part of this Unix family, this Unix-like family of operating systems. So this means that a lot of the commands you'll learn in this video and that developers use every single day are not going to work on Windows, or they'll work differently, or they'll partially work. Now, Windows has its own set of commands, and you could live in that world exclusively. It's just a different world. So if you want to use a lot of the common developer tools, and you're watching this video, you probably already know what you want to do, we need to get some way of running Linux commands on Windows. The way that we do this is really two options. There used to only be one. You used to have a virtual machine. It's a pain to install. It's totally isolated from your actual Windows operating system, and it can be slow, can have a lot of overhead. Now, instead, we have a really cool fancy option called WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux. This is actually put out by Microsoft, and it allows us to run a Linux environment directly on Windows, or inside of Windows. So it's not isolated, it's not a virtual machine. It actually works directly inside of Windows. It's just a command line version of Linux, to be clear. So you're not going to have a separate desktop. You're not going to have all the apps and stuff that I have on Ubuntu. But that's kind of the point. You can still be a Windows user and have Linux commands from the command line. So it's really, really cool. It's updated pretty frequently. It's still under active development. And the really good news is that it's a lot easier to install these days than it used to be. You do need to make sure you have Windows 10 version 2004 with build number 19041 or higher, or Windows 11 in order to use the simplified installation instructions. Otherwise, I would recommend going to this webpage anyway, docs.microsoft.com, look for WSL, because this does change. But if you have an older version, you can still install WSL, you just have different instructions. But if you have the right now, you just search PowerShell. Okay, this opens up this terminal where you can see PS, by the way, I'm using PowerShell. I can type commands in here and it tells me, in that case, I don't know what the heck you're talking about, but the command we want to run is WSL -- install. So let's try it, WSL -- install. The requested operation requires elevation. So what this is telling me is that I need to have admin privileges or permissions to do that. So why is that happening? Well, I need to run PowerShell as an administrator. So I'm going to search again for PowerShell, but I'm going to click on Run as Administrator here. Alright, and that opens me up a new window. It says Administrator, Windows PowerShell, and we try again. WSL -- install. Whoops. And it might take a little while, so I'll be back when hopefully this finishes successfully. And if not, I guess you'll watch me debug it. Oh, check it out. Already we can see it's downloading Ubuntu. So that's the default Linux distribution it uses. When I first installed WSL a year or two ago for a different course, you actually had to go and download your Linux distribution separately. You had to go download WSL separately. You had to then connect the two and point it to the particular installation, and it was just a huge pain. But now, hopefully, super easy. Take a look. It says the requested operation is successful. That's always good. Changes won't be effective until the system is rebooted. So let's reboot. Okay, so once that finishes up, I restarted. I now have, actually when I restarted, it automatically opened up Ubuntu, which is now installed. It wasn't even a thing before. Now I have an app I can run called Ubuntu. It opens up right now, at least this terminal that I can see here, and it tells me, I had to install for a few minutes, and then it wants me to set up a default user account. And this username that I set up does not have to match my Windows username, but whatever you do, you want to remember what you put in here. So this is going to be for our Ubuntu part of this machine. I'm going to make my username Colt, and then a password. And you'll want to remember that password. You're not going to see what you're typing. But I'll hit enter and then retype it again.
No one seems to know this, but Amazon actually has a $50 million fund that they have to pay out every single month. And here's how you can get a cut of it. My name is Charlotte Nicholson, and we help everyday people grow their income with this one simple method. And we're pretty darn good at it. Our company, Publishing.com, was named the 19th fastest growing company in America. And the only reason we're so successful is because of the success that we created for others. And I'll tell you why our method works so much better than anything else you might have tried. It's because starting a business is not the best way for regular people to make more money. And that's what everyone gets wrong. Starting and running a business is hard. It's expensive, it takes a long time, and it requires skills and experience that most people don't have. Instead, we help you plug into Amazon and the $500 million a year business they've already built. Now, the way we do it is completely different from anything we've seen before. We don't show you how to buy and sell physical products on Amazon like everybody else. The way we plug into Amazon is through this app on our phone called Audible, which most people don't know is one of Amazon's apps. And using this app, I showed my mom how to get paid checks like this from Amazon every month. Look, this didn't make her rich, so if that's what you're looking for, this isn't for you. But if you want an extra income stream on top of what you're currently making that pays you every month like clockwork, that we can help you with. So if you want to see how we do it, my husband Kristen, who discovered this method, just finished making the best video training we've ever made, walking you through step by step exactly how to set up this Audible app strategy for yourself. And the best part is it's 100% free. There's absolutely no risk in clicking on this video and seeing for yourself how this is working for so many people. So just hit the button on your screen, put in your email, and you'll have instant access to this free training which reveals everything. Steven here says, I'm so glad I didn't skip that YouTube ad because my last check from Audible was life-changing. And here's what others have to say about it. This past month I reached $8,000 in revenue, and I'm on track to reach $10,000 in revenue this month.
I've been able to go from 0 to 22K in 7 months, and of course, this completely changed my life.
I do this on a part-time basis, about 5 to 10 hours a week. I earn about $40,000 a year. There's no other job that pays with that little time.
So, to get free access to the training, all you need to do is tap the button on your screen, put in your email, and you can watch it right away. And look, if you're skeptical that what I'm sharing here is BS, or you think that those are paid actors, whatever you're thinking, that's fine. I get it. But that's exactly why we put together this free training for you, so that you can see for yourself what it's all about first. So you can see how it works, exactly how we do it, completely for free. Now, we wouldn't be the 19th fastest growing company in America if our stuff wasn't good. So the most important thing that you can do right now is don't waste any more time. Hit the link, go through the free training, see our 3-step process to making money with Audible, and get results. So again, my name is Charlotte Nicholson, and I'll see you on the training.
if you could learn to trade and make consistent profits in just 30 minutes a day, even if you're a complete beginner? If you're watching this, chances are you've thought about trading, but you haven't taken the plunge yet. Or maybe you've dabbled in trading before, only to end up frustrated, left wondering whether trading is just a game for the insiders and the experts who have years of experience. Maybe you think you don't have the time or the knowledge for it, or maybe you're stuck in a job that you don't love, working long hours and dreaming of a life where your money works for you. If any of that sounds familiar, I get it. But let me tell you, the problem isn't you or the markets. The problem is that you don't have a proven system that works for trading, which is simple, reliable, and doesn't require years of experience or tons of capital to get started. What I want you to do is think about where you are now and think about where you'd be a year from now if you continue to keep doing what you're currently doing, clocking in at a job that drains you, wondering if you'll ever have the freedom to spend more time with family, travel, or simply enjoy life. Still watching others cashing in on the biggest opportunities in the stock and forex markets while you're stuck on the sidelines. Here's the harsh truth, my friend. Every day you're leaving money on the table. But if you don't have the knowledge or the strategy to take advantage of the amazing opportunities that are in the markets right now, you're gonna regret it later. But here's the good news. You don't have to stay stuck where you are now. I've spent years perfecting trading strategies that work, and I've focused in on just 3 strategies which are designed to take any beginner trader from making zero trading online to making a decent weekly income. And I'm sharing all of them in my upcoming free online trading event. In this event, I'll teach you my 3 top trading strategies that take just 30 minutes of your time per day. And yes, you heard that right, you don't need to quit your job. You don't need to spend hours staring at charts or have a fortune to invest. I will show you step by step how to start trading with confidence, even if you have zero experience. Now, imagine this for a moment. You're sitting at home, coffee in hand, spending just 30 minutes a day doing your trades. Your portfolio starts to grow steadily, week after week, month after month. You're no longer stressed about bills or emergencies because your trading income has got you covered. You're finally able to say yes to that family vacation, upgrade your home, or even quit your 9-to-5 job. This isn't just about making money. It's about creating a life of freedom and choice. And here's the kicker. The strategies I'm sharing can be used by anyone, irrespective of your experience in trading stocks and forex. And in case you're wondering, who am I to make these promises? My name's Darren Winters. I'm a self-made investment multi-millionaire. I spent years learning from the best, testing strategies, figuring out what actually works and what doesn't work. And it led to a passion for teaching others about what I do, about how to do these strategies, so I can make an impact in other people's lives. And now at the Wealth Training Company, we've taught over 500,000 people how to trade stocks and forex. If I can do it and they can do it, you can do it too. Take Ravi Saman, for example. He started out with $1,000, and using one of my highly reliable strategies, he was able to make $6,000 profit in just the next 2 months. Afzal here has made about $400 to $500 per week using my strategies. That's an extra $2,000 every month for only 30 minutes or less per day. Or take Daryl, he was able to make $24,000 profit in a week. Once he knew my strategies, he's helping his mother and brother invest, so his brother can take care of his little 18-year-old daughter, which is pretty amazing, yeah? So look, I've got over 8,000 success stories and testimonials like these, but obviously I don't have time to share them all with you right now. So when you join my free online event, here's what you'll get. You'll get my 3 top trading strategies to help you build a consistent income every week. You'll learn how to trade with confidence and get more wins, even if you're starting from scratch. You're going to get insider tips on market timing, so you're never second-guessing your trades, so your profits keep growing whilst minimizing your risk and protecting your wealth at the same time. So look, if you want these easy-to-learn strategies that will help you trade with confidence and build a healthy trading portfolio, even if you've never traded before, join me in my free online trading masterclass. Click the link below, secure your spot, and do this now. Opportunities like this don't come around every day. So I'll see you in the training.
You can change that password later. I'll actually show you a command you can use to change that password. And there we are. I now have Linux. I'm running Ubuntu on my Windows machine. So the commands will learn things like pwd and who am I, just to show a couple of simple ones, or psaxww. There are lots and lots of commands we're going to cover, and they now will work. these commands are running on Windows. Now, there's some additional setup you can go through. If you go to the installation documentation, they recommend on Windows that you, whoops, this is the wrong page here. They recommend that after you set up your Linux user info, which we just did, that you can also install an app called Windows Terminal. And Windows Terminal is, remember, Terminal is just an application that can run different shells, and it can sort of be a jack of all trades. We can use Windows Terminal as our terminal. It's just a more sort of fancy, better features, more customizable terminal application. So you do not need to do this. But if you want to, you can install the Windows Terminal app. And you can make it look all nice and pretty and run Ubuntu from inside Windows Terminal rather than the default terminal that comes with Ubuntu. So one more time, perfectly serviceable just to use this terminal. But if you want to get Windows Terminal, if you're serious about mastering all this stuff and working as a developer or some other, you want to use terminal day in and day out, Windows Terminal is just the better option. It has more features. So I'm going to install it. I'm going to download it just from Windows website or Microsoft's website. And now that it's finished, I'll click Launch. And remember, a terminal is just like a piece of software that can connect or interact with different shells. So right now it opened up with PowerShell, which is not what we want to use in this course. First of all, let's see if I can just make this larger font for you. There we go. Okay, it's a little bit larger now. So as you can see, it's using PowerShell. But I can click this little drop-down arrow here and switch over to instead use Ubuntu. So now I'm in Ubuntu. You can see my prompt changes here. It has my username in there. You can customize the appearance and all of that. So if we go to settings, you can go down to Ubuntu. You can set up different appearance, font size. But what you can also do is set the default profile to be Ubuntu. And if we save that, it now means when I make a new window, if I just do plus, it is Ubuntu. You can see my little Linux penguin. That's the logo there. And we're now up and running with Windows Terminal. There's a lot you can do to customize it, but that's not really the point of this course. So now you have it. Run your commands here. When you see me run them in Ubuntu, run them here. Okie dokie. That should hopefully wrap up installation. Whether you are actually running Linux, like I am right now, Ubuntu, this is the desktop version. I have the terminal open. I will be running my commands right here. But if you're not, maybe you're using a Mac. So here's my Mac. I've got my terminal open right here. I'll run commands inside the terminal application here. They'll work just the same. And then finally, if you're on Windows, hopefully you installed WSL. So here we are. I'm running, this is Windows Terminal. I make sure I'm running Ubuntu here. I run my commands right here. So whichever one you're on, just make sure you know where you're going to be running those commands. If you're on Windows, make sure it's not PowerShell, because you'll run into problems. We want to make sure we are running Ubuntu so that our Unix commands will work. Otherwise, they won't. Yes, by the way, all three of these are on one computer right now. Got Linux, Windows, and my Mac. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so now that we hopefully have everything installed correctly, we can go ahead and get started. Now, before we do, the first thing I just want to make clear is that for the most part, there's no order to the commands in this video. It's a bunch of commands, and they're useful, and most of them don't really have to do with one another or depend on each other. But early on, right now, I'm going to go through some of the very basic commands, and there is a logical order to how I'm going to teach them. All of that is to say, if you're a complete beginner, stay right here, and we'll go through the basics in order. But if you have experience, if you know the basics of ls and man and cd and pwd, you may want to skip ahead. So check out the timestamps in the description below, and click on whatever command looks interesting or you'd like to learn more about. But if you are new, stick with me. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so before we talk about commands, let's talk about not commands. In my prompt, if I start typing really anything and I hit enter, the shell is going to try and process that and figure out what command I'm referring to. But I'm not referring to any valid command, so I get a message that says command not found. Same thing on a Mac. Type gibberish, we get command not found. Same thing over here on my Windows machine, although I'm running Linux on Windows, and I get command not found. Okay, hopefully not that surprising. So what we want to do is type commands that actually make sense, that the computer can figure out what we're referring to, and then run some corresponding program for us. And the first really simple one I'm going to show you is maybe not that useful, but it's just a good demonstration of a simple command. It is who am I? All one word, no spaces. who am I? All lowercase, it's going to print the username of the currently logged in user. So maybe not something you need to do all the time. You probably know who you're logged in as, though there are uses for this, especially in scripting, if you write scripts later on. But anyway, if I just run it here, who am I? Over here on my Ubuntu installation, I am logged in as Colt. That is the username I have. Here's my Mac. To run who am I? My username is slightly different. It's my full name, Colt Steele. And I think on Windows, it's just Colt as well. All right, so that's our first official command. Really, really simple, hopefully. Nice and straightforward. Right? There's a difference between just typing gibberish and typing a command that is recognized. But it is important to note, who am I, like this, is not the same thing at all. There's no real autocomplete or spell check or anything like that. The terminal is just going to take what you give it and try and find that program. So it can't find this program. Who am? It only knows who am I. Okay, so the next command we'll look at is called man. The man command, M-A-N, is short for manual. And that's exactly what it is. It is a command that it doesn't do anything to our system. It's purely informative. It tells us information or manual pages for commands, as well as some other things, not just commands, but we're going to focus on the command side of things. So anytime we have some new command, like we just learned, who am I, we can actually run man followed by that command name to get a manual page entry for that command. So if you need to learn more about who am I or any other command, most likely you won't need to learn more about who am I because it's so simple, but we can do just that. We can run man followed by a command like who am I. Hit enter. And our screen changes pretty drastically. That prompt goes away. I can't type commands anymore. What we see here is a man page. It tells us the name of the command, prints the effective user ID, something called a synopsis. We'll come back to this when we learn some other commands, and then a description. Print the username associated with the current effective user ID. Pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot here. We can see who wrote the command, and we can find a place to report bugs. This is a very simple man page. Some commands have very long pages, dozens and dozens of pages you would actually need to scroll through. Now, important to note, first of all, to get out of here, we need to type the letter Q. If you forget that, you can find it down here. But remember, I am not at my prompt right now. I can't type commands. So I can't type, who am I? If I type things, I start to see a whole bunch of other text appear. I'm actually looking at some help that tells me more about how this program works. So it tells me, you can exit by typing Q, or uppercase Q, or ZZ.